Hello.
And we're back.
I'm Ian.
I'm Steve.
Today, marathon sessions. It won't be a marathon video, though.
Nope, we don't have time for that because nobody has time to watch the whole thing in one of those.
And we're done. No, wait, not yet.
No, we got more.
So, as we mentioned before, the average length of a RPG game session, and we're talking about an RPG we're making, is about 4 hours.
Give or take. People going significantly less than that on a regular basis are generally going to be dissatisfied, and unless you are in college on your day off, you're probably not going to go too much longer than that, except for the occasional time when you do.
For example, we regularly get together about 3 times a year to do all-weekend gaming sessions where we do about 8 hours of gaming on each of 2 days.
It's exhausting, but worth it.
And there are other people who have monthly or bi-monthly get-togethers where they go for 8 hours at a stretch, etc. People do like to schedule marathon gaming sessions from time to time, and if you do so, the assumptions of this game system need to be changed. So, assumption number 1 is that the game session is about 4 hours and that you refresh your traits every game session. If you, as the GM, can structure things so that you take a significant, like a dinner break, at about that mark within a game session, it could be appropriate for you to simply refresh everyone's traits as though you had gone to a new game session in between, if you're able to have a good story and physically playing breakpoint.
Now, it's also possible, and this is something that does need to be addressed, we are saying that the longer you go, the more it will need to be restructured. It's plausible to assume that if you're a skillful enough GM, you won't actually need to do that. You could actually get a good GM, a good group of players ready to riff back and forth. The GM is ready to provide and slack off on challenges as appropriate. The players are willing to fail frequently enough that they're constantly refreshing their traits at a reasonable level. Constantly failing forward, constantly letting things get away, and then constantly succeeding where they want to, so that you never actually have to arbitrarily pause, refresh, and or change the length of the session. And that's literally the ideal case. If that happens, great. Everything is working as intended, and you guys are playing so much in the spirit of the game, you don't need us anymore. This is bad. Please need us.
If you do this, keep in mind that the longer you go, the closer you will get to a necessary 50% ratio. You won't ever actually get there because you've got the initial set of successes that didn't have to be failed to make up for.
But the longer you go, the closer you get to a 1-to-1, and honestly, narratively, long-term, that's not satisfying. Short-term, that can be very satisfying.
If you get to that and you were going for it, that's fine, because a 1-to-1 ratio will feel like a very, very difficult uphill battle for the characters, and that is, in fact, the ratio that we recommend for people who want a very difficult scenario.
However, after a while, if it goes on long enough, that will start losing the illusion and start feeling as arbitrary as it actually is.
Which is why we have some various suggestions.
Indeed. Do you want to go first, or should I?
You had a revolutionary one. Go ahead
Okay,
and spit it out.
here's a revolutionary one. Right now, the only thing that the system tracks is successes available, failures, and traits that are available or no longer available to use, as well as possible modifications to your character based on consequences.
On the player side, of course.
On the player side, yes. One possible way to deal with marathon sessions is by the addition to the character sheet of a stress and or injury track. Give them a certain number of, basically, physical or mental hit points. Call it stress for mental, call it injury for physical. Give them a certain number of points, depending on how long you want to go. If you're going for 8 hours, give them, 20 hit points in each. Anytime they fail, they can take additional damage to one or the other track, depending on what's important, and regain that many extra traits. However, if one of the bars fills up, the character will be out of the action until a set number of time later. If it is an injury trait, until it has been a significant time for the physical injuries to fade. If it's stress, until a significant amount of time for the mental stress to die down. It'll also die down at a set rate. Perhaps it'll die down naturally at 1 point per every 3 successes that the character makes as they start getting their second wind in the case of physical injuries, and just feeling emotionally better, riding the high of success in the case of stress.
There should be long-term consequences for taking injury or stress, even if you are not incapacitated. And if you're incapacitated, there should be permanent consequences that go on the character sheet.
But the important thing is, here is a way, a very easy way, to make a single failure refresh multiple traits simply by adding additional consequences that are tracked on the character sheet.
And we'll talk more about that specific mechanic later. One more mechanic to suggest before we close this session out is the idea that instead of refreshing based on specific failures with the injury tracks to represent gaining more traits back, you can refresh based on achieving certain story points, and say, if certain story goals are achieved, whether you got there through a success or a failure directly, then each character refreshes a certain number of traits. So, and that number does not have to be all of them, and it does not have to be any specific number.
It should probably be a little more than one, but not necessarily everything.
Based on how long it took to get there, you should decide the number. If it only took them an amount of session time that is going to cost each person about 3 successes to get there, then maybe it only restores 1. But if they used up half their successes to get there, then maybe it restores 3. And if they used up most of their successes to get there, maybe it restores 5 to 7.
These are usable even in shorter games. If you use the injury track idea in shorter games, you should probably not also refresh successes to full at the beginning of each session. If you use the milestone version in shorter games, one should be aware that they're not necessarily going to run out of successes before they get there anymore.
In fact, as well as being marathon session mechanics, these alternate mechanics would work very well to replace the refresh every session mechanic.
They certainly would.
So thanks for falling through the cracks with us, and we will be with you again.